There's nothing quite as fun as raising your own flock of backyard laying hens. I know when I first was thinking about getting chickens, I really was just quite overwhelmed by the idea of it, just because I had never done it before. And that tends to be the case with a lot of new things we're learning, whether it's gardening or trying to replace the battery on a vehicle. Your first time doing anything is just a little bit overwhelming because you don't have the experience. But in this video, I'm going to share with you the foundations of raising your own flock of backyard laying hens. That way you feel confident and ready to get that flock of chickens. Let's jump into it. Now we first just have to talk about why. Why chickens? Now I think that chickens are a fantastic entryway livestock for the vast majority of families, whether you live in a suburban environment or whether you live in a more rural acreage-based environment. There's nothing quite as fun, for one, as just having fresh eggs every day for you and the family, but it's a great way to homeschool and get the kids involved and just teach them about the cycles of life. Not only are chickens fun animals, but they serve some incredible purposes on the homestead. For one, you can make compost with chickens. Two, you can feed them kitchen scraps. And third is that you can use chickens to actually fertilize and increase the fertility of your pastures. So they are incredibly versatile animals, and they truly are just a gateway livestock. Now let's talk about how many chickens do you actually need in order to have enough eggs for you and your family. Well, the general rule of thumb is going to be 2 to 3 laying hens per person in your household. I would say on average, depending upon breed selection, which we'll get into that in a minute, they're going to lay you around 250 eggs per year per chicken. Now, of course, that's spread out over 52 weeks. And one thing to take into account is that just like you see within nature, chickens are going to lay the most amount of eggs in the spring when the weather is mild and the day length is increasing. And then what's going to happen is in the fall and the winter, the chickens are going to lay the least. So one thing to take into account, depending upon how many chickens you have, is you're going to have a surplus of eggs in the springtime, and then you're going to have a very limited supply of eggs generally in late fall and in the winter, because the day length is short and the temperature is also cold depending upon where you live in the country or the world. So one thing to think about is how are you going to preserve those extra eggs in the spring? And you can do that through water glassing, or you can also freeze dry eggs. There's a lot of different ways to preserve, or you can just simply give away the extra, and that's what we typically do. But I always tell people just take that into account, because you'd rather have a surplus in the spring. That way when you get to winter and they're not laying as much, that you still have enough eggs for you and your family. So 2 to 3 per person. I generally probably would lean more towards 4 to 5, depending upon your egg consumption in your family. I personally eat 3 eggs a day, so depending upon how many eggs your family's eating, just take that into account when you're figuring out how many chickens do you actually need. Now let's talk about breed selection. Now when it comes to selecting the breeds for your backyard flock of laying hens, in my opinion, I prefer dual purpose chickens. Now there are a lot of breeds out there. You can get tons of hybrids that'll lay you nearly an egg per day. But what I've found is that, to me, dual purpose breeds tend to be the best. Now, let me explain what dual purpose means. That simply means that the chicken can be used for both meat and for eggs. Because the reality is that a laying hen is only going to lay well for you for the first 2 to 3 years. And after that, you're going to need to do something with that laying hen. And I prefer to butcher them around that 3-year mark and use them as stew hens. With a dual purpose chicken, it's going to have a decent amount of meat on the carcass. And those are fantastic hens that you can throw in a crock pot and slow cook. Because typically after 2 to 3 years, the meat's not going to be very tender. So it is perfect meat for you and the family. But again, just make sure you do some method that is going to slow cook the bird to where that meat will just fall off the bone. So some of the breeds that I personally love are the Rhode Island Red, the Barred Rock, the Buff Orpington, any breed of Wyandotte, the Black Australorp. There are a lot of dual purpose breeds, but I would encourage you to stick to those. They may not lay as well as like an ultra hybrid, but they tend to do well through all climates and through all seasons. I have found that some of those hybrid birds will actually completely quit laying in the wintertime when it gets real cold. And I've just found that the dual purpose breeds tend to be my favorite and do the best on our homestead. I've also found that dual purpose breeds tend to be great workers. They forage really well for bugs, grubs, worms. They do really good on pasture, but they also are fantastic at making compost with, because one thing you'll learn over time is that you can put your chickens to work and you can train them to do a job for you, like turning a compost pile and incentivizing that with burying grain in a compost pile. So there's a lot of ways you can actually use your chickens as workers. I mean, I would encourage you to get creative in doing that. Now that you've figured out what breed of chickens you want, now it's time to figure out where are you going to get these chicks. Now, a lot of people will order baby chicks from hatcheries, and the hatcheries are going to mail you those chickens in the mail. And honestly, this is the way that most people do it. And what you're going to do is actually raise this chicken from baby chick to the moment that it's ready to put inside the coop. I would encourage you to do this because I think it's just a lot of fun, and also it's just a great learning experience, taking that chick from, you know, a 3-day-old bird all the way up to an adult that's laying eggs for you and your family. It's just a fun way to get the family involved. Now, you're going to need some basic items when it comes to brooding out chickens. You're really just going to need some form of a trough, a heat lamp, and some bedding, and then obviously some feed and water. And if you want a full detailed video on actually how to set up a brooder for your chickens, I will link that video that I've done on that above. I'll also put the link to that down in the description. So for this next section, I'm actually going to take you with me and walk around with the camera. Would you be quiet? Lord, chickens always want to make noise when you're trying to shoot a video. So when thinking about your chicken coop setup and the way you want to design this, you've got multiple routes or options. Now, a lot of times when people think of a typical chicken coop, they think of a stationary coop. Now, this is a mobile coop that we have here that's built on a Tractor Supply trailer. But imagine if this coop was just permanently in the ground. We had some 4x4 posts concreted in the ground, and this is just where these chickens stayed forever. They had some fencing set up. Let's imagine this is permanent, you know, metal fencing. This is actually electric fencing that's portable. I'll get into that in a minute. So it's a permanent area. We've got woven wire, you know, metal woven wire fencing in just a big rectangular square. So what's gonna happen in that case if you build a chicken coop set up like that, and I'm totally for that if that's all the space you have, is it's eventually going to become just a barren lot. Like, there's not gonna be a single piece of vegetation growing. Now, you may be like, well, Dirk, there's not a lot growing where you're standing right now, and you're correct, because it's summertime, and this is where we actually put our chickens in the summer because it's so hot out. And in the process of that, we've got tons of wood chips so that we can make compost in the process. So that's a whole nother conversation. But my point is if you don't have the ability to rotate or move your chickens around, there will be no vegetation. It's just going to become a dirt, muddy lot, and your chickens won't have a whole lot of anything to forage on. So I guess my point is, I'm a huge proponent of mobile chicken coops. Coops that you can move around. Coops that you can roll out or move to the pasture if needed. Even if you're in a suburban environment and you don't have the ability to, you know, have pasture, the great part is if it's a mobile coop, you can take it with you when you leave. Coops tend to be a little bit expensive to build depending upon the setup. And so why would you not want to be able to take your chicken coop with you when you leave? And it just gives you so much versatility. So this is a mobile chicken coop that you're seeing here behind me. This is one that we built. We do have design plans to this coop. It's built on a trailer. You can actually fit up to 70 chickens in this. We've had 70 birds in here before. Now we've only got about 20. But my point is we can move these chickens wherever we want to. We can move them out to pasture during mild seasons, like in the spring and fall. And then in the summertime, we put them under these 2 big oak trees because it's way too hot out on the pasture. They're gonna croak if it's 100 degrees. So we pull them in here and we make compost with them in the process. You may say, what do you do in the wintertime in a mobile coop? Well, what we do is we pull that chicken coop into a big greenhouse where they get to hang out all winter. So to me, mobile chicken coops are way more versatile, and ultimately it's just going to be way better for the health of your chickens in the long run. Now you may ask, how do you contain the chickens when you're moving them around? Well, we do this with electric poultry fencing. This is electrified fencing, and this keeps predators out. It also keeps the chickens in, and we do clip their wings when they are about 16 weeks of age to keep them from flying over the fence. But this is a very effective way for managing the chickens. So now let's talk about feed, water, and supplements. And when it comes to feed for chickens, once they reach adult stage or they start laying eggs, you're gonna wanna feed them a 16 or 18% layer feed. Now, there are obviously a ton of feed options out there when it comes to laying hens. You can go to a local feed store and get some really cheap, 16 or 18%, layer feed. But I really encourage you to read the ingredients on the feed that you're feeding your chickens. A lot of times the really cheap feed is just a ton of grain byproducts. And to be honest, I really question what's in a lot of these feeds. It's not really clear. So one thing that we do is we actually feed our chickens a really high quality, non-GMO organic feed from Scratch and Peck Feeds. Now, Scratch and Peck has been a long sponsor of our content here at Tanner Farmstead, but just to be 100% clear, I was buying and feeding this feed to my chickens back in 2019, long before they sponsored me. So I would highly encourage you to really check them out. Not only is their feed non-GMO and organic, but it's some really high quality ingredients: organic peas, organic barley, organic wheat, flaxseed meal, and it's also corn and soy free. And in my opinion, this really is some of the best feed you can buy in the United States. So I've got a link down in my bio and you can check them out and get a little discount by using my promo code. I'll have that down in the description. Now, when it comes to some supplements, I would encourage you, depending upon your situation, to supplement with grit. If you live in an environment where there's not gonna be some natural small rocks and pebbles that the chickens can get from the ground. And you also can supplement with some oyster shell. That's just gonna really help the development of that eggshell and just make sure it's nice and hard. And in regards to water, just make sure the chickens always have clean, fresh water every day. Now, the last thing is, what are some mistakes that you should avoid? Well, the first biggest mistake is simply people do not predator proof their chicken coop well enough. Chickens are a fantastic snack for coyotes, for foxes, for raccoons, for possums. And the last thing you want is for something to get into your chicken coop. You've done all of this hard work to get your chickens ready. You've spent 20 weeks getting them to the age of where they're gonna lay some eggs for you. And then you get a predator that comes in and wipes out the entire flock and rips their heads off, and it literally looks like a massacre. This happens, y'all. So you need to make sure, again, that you have a very, very predator-proof chicken coop, and you need multiple lines of defense. For example, with our setup, we have the electric poultry fencing on the outside. Well, that keeps ground predators out pretty well. To my knowledge, we've never had an issue with ground predators, but we could have aerial pressure. For example, we've had an owl kill multiple of our chickens because I accidentally left the chicken coop open at nighttime. So it kept all the ground predators out, but we had an owl swoop in and kill several of our chickens. So again, predator proof your chicken coop. And that's one of the reasons I personally love a mobile chicken coop like we have on a trailer, because it's next to bulletproof. A ground predator, even an aerial predator, if it's closed up, there's no way they're getting in there to eat a chicken. Ultimately, I think if you can keep your chickens alive, you can give them some good feed and water, then you're going to be doing great.